Hi, welcome. I'm Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, and very excited and pleased to invite you to our call today with Isaac Yitzchak Bougie Herzog. I'm excited because of the fact that he's has an unbelievable career and I would say has become a good friend in the last couple of years that I've gotten to know him. Since 2018, he has served as chairman of the Jewish Agency. Today, he'll be speaking to us, which is the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. The Zionist Rabbinic Coalition is a group of rabbis, grassroots group of rabbis from across all denominations, whose mission is to promote unity, understanding, and cooperation among the Jewish community of Israel and the diaspora. In many respects, it's what Bougie Herzog has devoted his life to. After having been a member of Knesset from 2003 to 2018, and having served as chairman of the Labor Party and also as opposition leader from 2013 to 2018, Isaac Herzog became the chairman of the Jewish Agency. Many of us know, the rabbis on the call especially, which that's just about everybody here, of his amazing yichus. His father, of course, was Chaim Herzog, who was the ambassador to the United Nations and president of Israel. His grandfather was chief rabbi of Israel from 1936 to 1959. His mother founded the Council for a Beautiful Israel. His uncle, Abba Eben. I can only imagine what your Shabbat dinner conversation must have been like. And now he is head of the Jewish Agency, which is also known as the Sochnut, the largest Jewish nonprofit in the world. And so it's a great pleasure to be able to invite Bougie Herzog to speak to us today about his perspective about what's going on in the Jewish world, in the Jewish community. And let me just ask if you'll begin by helping us to understand what is the work of the Jewish Agency, and especially what are the things that have become part of your priority and your emphasis. And after we hear from Mr. Herzog, then we'll be opening it up for questions. Please feel free to send questions in the Q&A or the chat section to me. Welcome, everyone, including Mr. Herzog.
So thank you very much, Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, and thank you to all the members of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. Indeed, you became a good friend of mine in the last few years because I noticed your unique activity of trying to bridge gaps and rifts within the Jewish people. That was actually our agenda before COVID-19. But I'd like to give a short overview of how the Jewish world is functioning these days. I'd be happy to hear some feedback about how your communities are doing these days. And of course, later on, explain what the Jewish Agency is all about, as we are the biggest Jewish organization in the world, actually the organization that established the State of Israel. So in fact, we are a global organization. And as such, we cover all communities around the world. We work in 60 countries, and we cover hundreds and hundreds of communities. And what we found out from the beginning is that in certain places, COVID literally paralyzed the community. You have it in your own communities. You realize that COVID is actually paralyzing the ability to convene. And we as Jewish people, we're based on minyan. We're based on the notion of being together, of Kol Yisrael Arivin, and V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and etc. And therefore, the idea that we have to be in our homes in lockdowns brings us to literal paralysis of communities. Also, this situation has exposed in like X-ray ways the weaknesses of many communities who are aging, who are ailing, who are dysfunctional, basically, whose leadership is older and less rejuvenated, whose institutions are less. Many communities are shifting to the bigger cities, or communities who the members, a lot of them made aliyah or went out to other countries. So this is like a major challenge. You on the one hand, you want to secure the centrality of Israel or the ability of the Jewish world to function. On the other hand, you also want to enable Jewish life wherever it is. So as such, it started actually with a community in Italy, 22 communities, 20,000 Jews. It's the most historical, actually, saying we're the oldest on earth, except Jerusalem, of course. And that community was hit so badly from the beginning that we even helped them supply hygiene products and food, even until recently as a Jewish agency. But that taught us through our network of emissaries whom are scattered all over the world, our shlichim, some of them are in your synagogues as well, who became like our eyes and ears and social workers in a way, that what the needs of each community is. So our biggest source of pride is the fact that we are the only organization that immediately arranged a special fund to assist communities outside the United States, by the way, because in the United States, you're covered by the Jewish Federations of North America and the federation system, which has done incredibly well with getting also government funding for its activities. But outside the United States, many communities, and we've covered in our loan fund over, around $10 million of loans without interest-free loans for 4 years, enabling the community oxygen. We have given the money to organizations that oversee the activity of the entire community, and they give it to the schools, the kindergartens, or the youth movements, or the old age homes, and so forth and so on. And by that, we got to understand the needs of communities, and I can go on each community, but take, for example, South Africa. South Africa is in dire situation. That country, anyway, has huge leadership problems, huge rampant inflation, devaluation of the rand, and the lack of any support to the community, but from within itself. And from some of its expats too, who've moved to England, Australia, the United States, and Israel. But predominantly, you could see from that how the community needs help in their social services, in the schools, in the kindergartens, in security, and so forth and so on. And once we understood that, parallel to the loan fund, we've also initiated a whole platform of assisting communities with know-how from Israel. We brought experts from Weizmann Institute to communities by Zooms, or experts from our trauma coalition. We've helped communities in France, in Britain, in Spain, and Latin America, and so forth and so on. One has to say that COVID-19 has hurt communities dramatically. In France, which you have about 400,000 Jews, which is 5% of the state of Israel. We in Israel, unfortunately, have 330 casualties. In France, in Jewish France, there were 2,000 casualties, which shows how exorbitant the number is. Many old age, same goes for Britain, the same goes for Spain, Latin America, FSU countries, and many communities scattered in various places on earth. So that is the situation that we are faced with. Jewish life, historical Jewish life, the emergence of Israel as a central pillar in the paradigm. 2 days ago, actually yesterday, there was a special cabinet meeting which worked with us closely in a new paradigm of how the government of Israel extends its hands further to communities and helps communities in various realms. Most of it will be, a lot of it will be done with us. Then, of course, there are push and pull factors which impact Jewish world dramatically on other issues. One is Aliyah. We project a major wave of Aliyah to Israel. We see an enormous number of applications, an enormous number of phone calls into our global center, an enormous number from all spheres of, or let's say all corners of the earth, many English speakers from various communities around the world. And we see also some factors which have to do with the fact that we also see a rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric on the web, anti-Semitism per se in the streets, in places. So all of it together, coupled with people's feelings that simmered within them during the lockdown, we clearly see that as a very major step, which we haven't seen since the end of the last century, the 20th century in Israel, with a huge wave of Aliyah. And so what will emerge out of it, in my mind, also a lot of rethinking on how Israel sees the Jewish world. There are many things I can go into later about, opening new venues between the various Jewish streams, and a lot of things that will go way beyond the political debate, which of course looms over our lives and threatens the unity of the Jewish people in a way. So I will stop here and I will open the floor for questions, and you can lead the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a number of questions, so let me just fire away, and then there's some that have been sent to me as well. The first question I want to ask you is, having served in the political realm for so long, and then what is it that motivated you to aspire to seek this position? What was it that you were hoping to do? And does this mean that you remove yourself from politics, so to speak? Explain to us a little bit about that.
First of all, I did remove myself from politics. I was the leader of the opposition. I was almost prime minister in 2015. I led Labour. And then I had the best result of Labour since Yitzhak Rabin. But, voters are sometimes short-sighted. And in July 2017, we held a re-election. I again approached my members of my party and asked for their support. And they thought they will choose somebody new, who meanwhile has been kicked out of that office, and a few others since then. My party basically has collapsed. But once I left Labour and I was still the leader of the opposition, I went on vacation to the United States with my wife and met friends of mine who graduated with me at Ramaz School in New York back in the 1970s. And I was awed, flabbergasted by the amount of time we devoted to the question, how do we keep our children Jewish? And everybody, I went to many friends, not only from Ramaz. And I came back home, I started knocking on doors and telling people, look, this is something that Israel must be involved to see how we save our brothers and sisters, Jewish continuity and the like. And little did I know, I'll get a phone call from Michael Siegel, the chair of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency, offering me to put my name up in the shortlist for the leadership of the Jewish Agency. And I was elected, and I started exactly 2 years ago, and it fulfills my being, and I'm very honored to serve the Jewish people as the most important Jewish organization on earth.
By the way, there's some people who may not realize, but you follow a very notorious list of unbelievably accomplished individuals, including your immediate predecessor, Natan Sharansky, Salai Meridor, David Ben-Gurion. So this is really a key critical post. And I know that shortly after you came in, and one of the things you talked about was the emphasis of Jewish identity and Jewish unity. And then in what you just shared with us just now, maybe we'll come back to it about the COVID crisis, how that kind of has derailed everyone. But talk to us, can you share with us a little bit some of your perspectives about that concept? And those may be separate issues. Jewish identity is one thing. How do we strengthen Jewish identity? How do you see the role of Israel in that? And then also within the context of Jewish unity, and then I'll want to follow up on that a little bit.
Okay, so that's a long lecture. I'll say that what brought me really strongly into this is the fact that I was extremely worried, and am still, about the difference between what I call Jerusalem and Babylon, meaning the two main pillars of Judaism today are Israel and North America. And Jerusalem and Babylon in ancient times gave two different Talmuds, and they should correspond with each other, with Ahavat Israel, the love of Israel, at the center of everything. I'm a true believer in Ahavat Israel. I'm also a true believer in Netzach Israel, the eternity of Israel. How do we preserve that? The worst thing would be a rift between our nations growing like this. Actually, there's so much to unite. And actually, we, the Jewish Agency, are at the heart of this. Just to say a word about our organization, we were founded by the international community and the Zionist movement to bring about the creation of the Jewish state. That was about 100 years ago, and we were founded 90 years ago. And we brought about the creation of the Jewish state. Indeed, David Ben-Gurion, where I sit in his room in Jerusalem, led us to independence. Then we were commissioned to bring in the Aliyah to Israel, the ingathering of the exiles. We brought in over 4 million Olim so far. Last year only, 2019, we had a record year of 35,000 Olim from 45 countries. It's something metaphysical that's unbelievable when one sees how it's going on and on and on. Even during the COVID, we had a silver lining of about 2,200 Olim from about 20 different countries. They're all quarantined and all. So, and then in the last generation, we were put at the center of the issue of unity or dialogue or connection between Jews all over the world to themselves and to the state of Israel at their center. So experiences such as Birthright and Masa, which is our flagship program, bringing 15,000 young Jews to intern in Israel in all sorts of venues. And of course, many other projects like Onward and experiences of all kinds. We have thousands of shlichim. We had every year at least 2,000 shlichim go out in the summer, counselors to camps and so forth and on, so on. Partnerships, dozens of partnerships between federations and communities in Israel and abroad. So all of this is like a bridge, living bridge of understanding and getting to know each other. I see there's a question from Rabbi Schwartzman about the annexation. Believe me, we'll talk about annexation, but it cannot be that this is the only issue that affects the dialogue between the Jews. There are so many issues that affect the dialogue between the Jews, and that the politics of the day dictate a lot of our issues, rather than having a discussion on so many spheres that are, also causes of dialogue, but also causes of argument. Fine, but at least we can open the Zoom and have more topics for discussions as well. And the more we focus only on what's like the issue of the day, because it comes from politics, it affects the dialogue. Now I can say that we are the most influential organization in impacting Israeli society about getting to know what Jewish life abroad is all about. We send shinshinim, gap year kids, hundreds every year, to communities, to serve in the communities. These are handpicked, 1 out of 20, each one of them. And then they go back to Israel and they become your ambassadors in explaining to Israelis what peoplehood is all about. We've impacted the Israeli educational system. Now all Israeli kids, 6th and 7th grade, learned for a long time about what Jewish peoplehood is about and what is diaspora Jewry or world Jewry all about. What is pluralism and the pluralistic dialogue. So these are all processes that are underneath and you don't hear much about, but they are making a difference. So I believe that on the one hand, unity is a must, or at least we should strive to it, because there will always be arguments and rifts and quarrels and politics and what's not. That's natural. But we should have red lines. First and foremost, that we all agree that Israel is at the center of Jewish life, and there's no legitimacy of none whatsoever in boycotting it or in sanctioning it. And secondly, we should definitely focus on introducing each other as much as we can to each other and see things way above the immediate day politics.
So in that context, let's talk a little bit about the extension of sovereignty and the annexation issue. Is there anything in particular you would like to comment in regard to that, and or the concern that there are voices within the Democratic Party, progressive wing, others in the Jewish community as well, who are expressing concern about what may happen in that regard? And we don't even know what's going to happen.
First of all, criticism is definitely legitimate, and it's a huge debate in Israel. And as you can see, nothing happened on the 1st of July. Just imagine the amount of spins and bad mouthing and bad news and a lot of rhetoric that impacted so far the image of Israel and the way Jewish community is also relating to it. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean it won't happen. There could be decisions that may be taken. It depends a lot on the relationship with the administration. Depends heavily on Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi and their dialogue with Netanyahu. Depends on the military situation, the regional situation, our border with Jordan. A lot of issues. There are a lot of issues here at stake. In fact, people lack a huge amount of knowledge. For example, the real situation is that by a Supreme Court precedent, Israeli law applies on all settlers. It applies on them personally, not on their premises, not on the jurisdiction of the settlement itself, but on their life. So if all court cases are tried upon in Israel. So it's a de facto, there is application of Israeli law. Do you call it annexation? Big question, because it's all pending and waiting a decision in a peace process with the Palestinians, who for a long time haven't come up to the table and reneged on a dialogue on the Trump peace plan, which if you would take the word Trump, one could see that there's some logic in it too. Not complete, a lot of questions, but definitely I hope this conversation is kind of off record, because I insist not to go into politics with my organization, which has always been a unifying organization, not taking part in a political discourse. But as we speak as friends, I say people have to study the repercussions. As to Rabbi Schwartzman's question, I think I would make sure to oppose any type of this resolution, because it's really, I know that it's really not really picking up in the Democratic Party, as far as I understand. Doesn't make any sense. Israel is strategic ally of the United States. Security of Israel is actually security interest of the United States. And it only helps our enemies and the enemies of the United States in the region. So I think that I don't give it a chance, but one should stand up against it.
In so many respects, Israel these days is so very strong, not just militarily, but absent, of course, the COVID crisis, but in terms of economically, in terms of the relations with other countries. And yet, among many young people in the United States, there often is concern among certain groups, again, within the progressive community especially. And one of the rabbis asked about, what to share with his daughter about the image of Israel internationally and so on. So what, can we as rabbis, what can the Jewish Agency, what do you do? How do you see this problem of trying to, convey the positive aspects about Israel so that it's not perceived in a negative kind of a way?
No, there's nothing like a personal experience. Now there's no travel. Although we are dealing with the issue of immersive experiences, we are actually developing alternative experiences, most of it on the web. And we'll try our best until things go back, and we assume it's going to take the year at least. So it definitely impacts a whole cohort of children who haven't gone to camp or anything. There's a huge amount of distortion. We have fellows on campuses, the Israel fellows who are out there on campuses explaining what Israel is all about and working really hard. And I would urge the synagogues to invite a local Israeli fellow. If you need, we'll connect you to the person who runs this program. Amazing Israelis who came out of army or college and serve on campuses in the United States. There's enormous amount of distortion. Let's take the Israeli political system. I think it's better than the United States. I think that in the United States, you can't even amend your constitution. You have a huge problem with the NRA, and for better, for those who are in favor, those who are against. So how can you blame Israel when you have your own faults in the American political system? In Israel, We had 3 elections. That's because the people decided, the people you'll make the decision, and they tried 3 times to bring to a decision. And at the end, in a lot of pain, enormous amount of pain, people went and founded a unity government as an opposition and coalition and demonstrations every day and free speech as large as anybody can imagine, with Muslim Brotherhood Party represented in the Knesset, which you don't have anywhere in the world, and an Arab judge throws our president to jail. But none of this comes out to the knowledge of people abroad. All they know is how to bash Israel. Our contribution to humanity is enormous in so many spheres. Yes, we have our problems. We are dealing with a very heated one, which had to do actually with a war imposed on us in 1967 and the issue of security, which is something really inherent in our being naturally. However, having said that, we are in the best relations one can imagine with our regional neighbors, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Jordan, Egypt, the Gulf, Bahrain, and so forth, meaning the geostrategic situation is much more complex. We are dealing with an enemy that's threatening to swallow the region with hate of the worst kind and annihilate the Jews of their own nation state. So all I'm saying is that we have to do it together to impact Jews and say, okay, I want to argue, let's first understand what is Gush Etzion. The Gush Etzion was a Jewish settlement block before 48. Actually, the main settlement is called Masuot Yitzchak, bearing the name of Chief Rabbi Isaac Halevi Herzog, my grandfather. And they were all slaughtered. So does it mean that because of it, we won't want to annex Gush Etzion one time or another? It's about 1% of the land in dispute, and we can swap land with the Palestinians. Depends how you look at the issues at stake. If you say, I want to bash Israel because it's a good reason, just to bash Israel, okay? That's like and getting into the debate because of the Netanyahu-Trump relationship, that's one thing. But if you say Israel is above it, it's our nation state, it has a duty also to extend its hands to world Jewry, and we with it hand in hand, then and argue, but argues as family, that's another issue.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, one of your counsel to rabbis, advice to rabbis in particular, and American Jews, is in terms of how it's discussed. This question of being able to emphasize the positive and to understand, the complexities. All too often,
Exactly, and I'm open to any question, believe me. By the way, rabbis are the best. I think the rabbis are the way to deliver the message. I'm a huge fan of rabbis of all denominations. I envy rabbis because I know sometimes you envy me, but I envy you because I believe that rabbis, the fact that they have a community to take care of is such a huge responsibility. It also enables them to bring the message, to convey it, to say, yes, okay, I have criticism. Okay, but we should still say the prayer, that Tfilah L'Shlom HaMdina. Because Israel is something that goes beyond Benjamin Netanyahu or Yair Lapid or Benny Gantz or anybody else.
So having traveled to a number of countries where I've seen firsthand the work of the Jewish Agency, one of the things that I find especially inspiring is that it really reminds us we are a people. And Judaism is not just a religion. Could you talk a little bit about that, in what way, that has, if that's been something you found to be more the case in your new position, and how that works and how that is reinforced?
Well, so every day I'm impacted by the debate whether Mordecai Kaplan was right when he says that Judaism is actually a culture, a civilization, or is it a religion only, as you just mentioned, or is it something else? Because some say it's actually a nation, a nationalistic trait. And we can argue about that for hours. We won't get anywhere except say that the Jewish people are all over the world. And when you walk into a synagogue, no matter which denomination, you see the Siddur and the Sefer Torah and the Kiddush, it's all in touch. You immediately, you're in a family. And this is really, really interesting. Today I sat with the Indian ambassador to Israel. And I brought the Jews of Olim, a group of Olim from India, who came to speak to him about desecrated grave sites and closed synagogues, empty synagogues who have emptied because the communities dwindled down. And say, India, Jews came to India for so many reasons. Okay, and the history of Jews is so fascinating. And Jews are emerging from the heartland of the Amazonas. They were descendants of the Anusim from Spain. So, and there's so many Jews of color. And the Jewish people are changing with so many fascinating developments. So, this is a great nation. We should be proud of it. And we should really, really appreciate the fact that we have a nation state of our own.
Is this something that the Jewish Agency is involved in terms of bringing back descendants of Anusim, people who were...
It's a big issue. It's a big issue. It's been studied. We have people going to communities, and then we have to decide how to deal with it, because it also relates to the issue of conversion, the issue of who's a Jew. Many questions that are deep. I mean, they have to be studied in depth. There is a committee that Naftali Bennett at the time appointed, which claims that about 60 million human beings around the globe were actually linked to Judaism, so some one way or another. I think there are many more, by the way. So we are dealing with it, but there are communities who are functioning as full-fledged religious Jewish communities all over the world, mostly in Africa and Latin America, which we are studying now closely.
And trying to see if there's a connection and perhaps even aliyah and things like that?
Yeah, but you have to understand, for example, the institutionalized Jewish establishment in Brazil is very cautious and weary, and it's a process. We've agreed on a dialogue with these groups. I mean, it has an impact which is natural. They don't know what to do with it. We are studying it. We sent emissaries there to talk to them. We're bringing some on Masa to see if they want to know more. And of course, the Reform and Conservative movement are quite heavily involved in other places, such as in Africa.
So I want to talk a little bit about that in terms of, and I hope I'm not going to be raising an inappropriate question here. If so, let me know. But that is, the Jewish Agency serves the entire Jewish people. And obviously, in many areas, there are the interactions with the different streams. You've referred to the conservative form. Also with the Rabbanut within Israel, which in the last few decades certainly has moved away from where it was when your grandfather, alav shalom, had served as the chief rabbi. So in what way does Jewish Agency interact with either the various denominations and movements, or is referred to often as streams, as well as with the Rabbanut?
So first of all, we are the ones who are the most actively advocating pluralism in Israel. We support activities of all Jewish streams in Israel and directly, and we have a huge impact on pluralism in Israel. We are the voice of the Jewish people in Israel by our covenant with the government of Israel. We have the biggest caucus in the Knesset, and we present the voice of the Jewish world abroad, and as such, we raise the issue of the fact that Jewish streams abroad have a huge Jewish life, and they should be represented in Israel. So all streams of Judaism are our partners. Our governance is very politically built, but politically not in the partisan way of things. It's called the national institutions by the World Zionist Organization. As some of you may know, there were even elections this past March, and there's even a shift in some of the American representation today, together with an Orthodox list who ran, and I think it's a very important development. I think the multitude of voices of the Jewish world is really important. I think everybody should be under the tent. Israelis abroad should be under the tent. It's almost 1 million. Haredim should be under the tent as well, a very important group. And of course, the unaffiliated, to get to them as much as possible. It's a major challenge of ours.
In that context, you mentioned about the election. Can you comment a little bit? The World Zionist Organization Congress was supposed to take place in October. I imagine with have any decisions been made about that? And what can you tell us about the election itself?
First of all, this is a big political, Jewish political mess. I don't know how much you guys want to get into all the details, but in principle, God bless Theodor Herzog. So he understood that in order to get to his goal, he has to form the World Zionist Organization. And the World Zionist Organization was the founder of the first Zionist Congress in 1897. And since then, it's been convening every few years. And its constitution is built about 500 delegates or so, which is about 1/3 representative of the Israeli Zionist parties. 1/3 is representative of major Jewish organizations, such as Hadassah and WITZO and so many other important organizations. And 1/3 is actually votes which represent the various Jewish streams and groups abroad. And that's the famous elections which you had in March. And that organization founded a few organs. One is the Keren Kayemet, the Jewish National Fund, JNF, which was built to redeem the land of Israel. And Keren Hayesod, what's called KH, to finance the redemption of the land. Since then, by various treaties, Keren Hayesod operates outside the United States. And what was UJA became the Jewish Federations of North America within the United States. And our organization, the Jewish Agency, which was founded later in light of the Balfour Declaration to bring about the creation of the State of Israel, our governance is 50% by the WZO, so all the Jewish streams are there, and 30% the Jewish Federations of North America, which is a very respectable organization, and Eric Fingerhut is his CEO, and 20% Keren Hayesod.
So in terms of the results of the recent election, and will the Congress be meeting in October?
Yes, and you will have more representation of a more Orthodox presence than before, because of the new list, which includes Orthodox people as well. But it will be, I think, an incredible opportunity to have all streams under one tent. And here I want to open something interesting, which happened in recent weeks. So in recent weeks, there's a very important rabbi in the Israeli Zionist right, even the extreme right, the settlers' right, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed. He wrote already 3 articles consecutively that he believes it's about time to open a dialogue with the reform movement.
Wow.
Which is like a desecration of the Holy of Holies. And he got a lot of congratulations, also a lot of opposition. I could have detected that underneath because I'm leading many processes of dialogues with all Jewish groups in the country, and people are open to listen. And he even had a joint panel with a woman rabbi from France, Delphine Orviller. She's one of the greatest reform rabbis on earth, a very important person, a very important Jewish thinker. And together they had a dialogue in a big convention on the Jewish world in Makor Rishon newspaper. What I'm trying to say is that whilst people like to show only the bad things that are said by ignorant people about what it is to be Jewish abroad, I think people are learning more and more about the fact that their brothers and sisters abroad are their brothers and sisters indeed.
Can the Jewish Agency play any role in helping to maybe open up the logjam a little bit over the conversion issue? As you know, this has been a bit of a problem within the context both of within Israel and that it's so limited, and then acceptance of rabbis who are performing conversions outside of Israel who want to make aliyah. Any possibility the Jewish Agency can help to broker any progress on these issues?
So first of all, there's a huge, endless clash going on because actually the debate is about who has the authority on conversion in Israel. People who are converted abroad by any stream and approved by an approved congregation can make Aliyah to Israel automatically through the Jewish agency. I see a question here about a certain community. To our friend who asked it, send me an email and Rabbi Stuart will give you my email and we'll check out. I don't know the case itself, but predominantly there are a list of congregations and they are accepted around the world and so forth. So the issue has to do with conversion in Israel, meaning do the other streams, the non-Orthodox streams, have the right to convert in Israel. Recently, a major Supreme Court case enabled local Orthodox rabbis to carry out conversions without the permission of the Rabbanut. And that's why I tell Jews abroad, it's not that Israel is against you, God forbid, it's the Rabbanut who is against you. And take it in the right proportion and understand that there's a certain clerical establishment and one can argue with it, and let's do it in the right, proper manner. And so I simply urge people not to be dragged into battles just because somebody believes it's a battle. It's very important. I pay huge attention to it. I believe it's something of major principle, but I think it's moving on in an evolutionary process. It won't be done in a revolutionary process.
So in terms of the aspect then of and not just recognition of different movements, but within Israel itself, can you tell us a little bit, what did you see over the last decade or two? It seems as if there is greater receptivity in general in Israel among Israelis towards religion, maybe not necessarily, and recognizing that it doesn't necessarily always need to be within the context of the way in which the Rabbanut interprets things, and that there are more people involved in secular yeshivot and study of Talmud and things like that. So give
a lot of things. Look, Jewish life is very elaborate. One should not fear it. The first thing I've done when I came to the United States as chairman of the Jewish Agency, I went to Lakewood Yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is a very from ultra-Orthodox yeshiva. And from there, I went to meet Rabbi Rachel Timoner, who was a very famous rabbi from Brooklyn Slopes in New York, a Reform rabbi of a congregation of 3,000. And I told each one, I'm going to the other. And I must say, in close quarters, there's much more of an interest. In Israel, there's a lot of lack of knowledge. People don't understand, but people grew up without knowing that there are Jews of another stream. And I'll give you an example. There was a minister of education last year, Rabbi Peretz. Okay, and Rabbi Peretz was actually a general in the Air Force and chief chaplain of the army. But he said something about interfaith couples that stirred up the pot. And I immediately went to him and I gave him a lecture. He said, you know, Bougie, I never heard this. I never met anybody in my life who's from the Reform or conservative world. I never went to a synagogue. Rafi Peretz is his name. And he actually issued an apology. A lot of it has to do with like getting to know. And by the way, American Jewry doesn't know much about Israel, believe me. You guys know, but many Jews don't have no clue. And because they have no clue, they get a distorted image of Israel.
I think that is most definitely.
Remember our schedule, Rabbi Stuart. Okay, we have limited time. No.
Thank you, good. So as we come towards the end of our conversation then, let me just ask one or two other questions. First of all, are you having fun?
I'm enjoying it tremendously, but I'm worried about, I'm overwhelmed with a lot of challenges because it's 24/7, the needs and problems of the Jewish world all over the world. And I believe that, the strongest Jewish establishment and philanthropists and so forth should lend their hand as much as they can to their brothers and sisters, despite the fact that everybody's under challenge by the COVID.
Thank you. And then the last question I want to ask of you of a personal nature, and that is, I still remember when your father had ripped up the Zionism as racism resolution at the United Nations. What I didn't know until I read the book that you gave to me about your grandfather is that he had similarly done something where he ripped up the white paper of the British which the British had issued. Can you just maybe, as we close, share with us any perspectives on what it is that you think you've received from your parents, your grandparents, that inspires your work today?
So first of all, so if you mention books, just to tell our viewers, my father, Chaim Herzog, wrote an autobiography called Living History, and in Pantheon Books, and that biography depicts his incredible life, which was really in all points of history of the Jewish people in the second half of the 20th century. My late grandfather, Rabbi Isaac Alevi Herzog, was a huge leader and statesman and rabbi, and the biography of his came out in English called The Rabbinate in Stormy Days, The Life and Teaching of Rabbi Isaac Alevi Herzog, also came out 2 years ago. And so you mentioned both. My father's speech in the United Nations, which was heralded as one of the best speeches of the 20th century, is on YouTube. It's Chaim Herzog's speech on Zionism is Racism of November 1975, and I urge people to see it because that's the best lecture on Zionism that you can imagine. Right. I'm an ardent Zionist, and I'm also an optimist. I believe in my people. I do believe that we have major challenges, but I think that we live in a world which is challenged. I mean, the political behavior, which is based on hate and fear in these days, is something that impacts us dramatically, impacts our life, our children. I always say, we teach our kids all over the world, the 10 commandments, and then we don't adhere to them when we elect certain leaders and so forth. Something else impacts our life. It's very fascinating. And I say it from my own experience that I was a candidate myself. But I believe that, human beings are impacted by a lot of things these days, and therefore we have an obligation to act as leaders, to be focused, to be calm, to radiate leadership and give a vision to our people, and lead them through these very, very stormy days, which are very stormy. And I got that from my parents. My father always told me that he always had a perspective. My father was one of the first British officers to walk into Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And until today, I meet people who he saved and got out of the camp. He was a British officer. He told these skeletons that he's, in Yiddish, that he's a Jewish officer from Eretz Israel, and they didn't believe. They thought he's a disguised Nazi. So he always told me, Bougie, I always have a perspective. You have to look at things in the right perspective. Thank you all very, very much. It was a true pleasure, and keep on the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Bougie. We really appreciate you're taking not just the time to be with us, but all the work you do on behalf of the Jewish people. I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that our next call is on July 15th at 2 p.m. with David Makovsky. And then after that, on July 21, please note the change of date, with Danny Dayan, Israel's Consul General in New York. And we look forward to you joining us for these other conversations. These will be on the our website, zionistrabbis.org. And please, we wish everyone all the best. Thank you. Toda rabah.